Hi, everyone, and welcome to Tech Singapore Advocates, a founder's launchpad to Southeast Asia. We're thrilled you're joining us. We're especially happy to be coming to you live from Singapore. We're in person here. For us here on the little red dot, it's been a while since we've been able to gather like this, so it feels particularly apt and exciting to be sharing this Welcome Back Singapore event with you and with each other. Today, we'll be exploring how overseas businesses can grow into Singapore and the region, discussing raising capital, market entry strategies, and hit some real-world examples of how it's been done. We have a great lineup for you. We'd like to begin with a welcome message and some insights from Nick Dingemans, partner at Pennington's Manches Cooper LLP and head of their Singapore office. Nick?
Hello. My name's Nick Dingemans. I'm a partner with Pennington's Manches Cooper. I'm based in our Singapore office, but as you can probably tell, I'm in London at the moment. I'm sorry I can't join you today. Welcome to a Founders Launchpad to Southeast Asia. Pennington's Manches Cooper has been working together with Tech Singapore Advocates, London Tech Advocates, and the wider global Tech Advocates ecosystem since London Tech Advocates was first founded over 9 years ago. We're very pleased to be working together with Leslie and the team with Tech Singapore Advocates today for the first post-COVID event. Thank you to Leslie and the team for organising such a great event. Today you'll hear from a range of different speakers, including representatives of the Economic Development Board and a number of others. We think you'll find this a very useful session. Singapore is at the heart of an exciting geographic region. Within 1 or 2 hours flying time, or in our modern world of remote working or work from home working, 1 or 2 time zones, you have more population than any other part of the world. India, Indonesia, China, Japan, Australia, just to name a few, are all within easy reach. And based in Singapore, Singapore is both your landing point and your launch pad for this region. Singapore has become the centre of more and more dispute resolution. So Singapore is now one of the main dispute resolution hubs of Indo-Pacific in the wider regions. In addition, the choice of governing law, English law, or more and more commonly Singapore law, builds on this reputation of Singapore as the heart of a dispute resolution and a good governance centre. So the rule of law is fundamental in any investment decision, and Singapore at the heart of strong dispute resolution and strong governing law options is a strong centre for any of those investments. In addition, the Singapore government is looking constantly at ways to attract new investment in Singapore and also to create Singapore as an investment hub for wider investment in the region. So the combination of the geographic location, the immediate population around Singapore, the rule of law, dispute resolution, and the support of the Singapore government mean that Singapore is a fantastic landing point for anyone coming into that region, and also a fantastic launching point for investment into that region. We hope you have a good day today and enjoy all the different topics. Pennington Manches Cooper is here to support both Tech Singapore Advocates and your investment decision in Singapore. We have teams in the UK, we have teams on the ground in Singapore, so please do not hesitate to reach out to us. Thank you very much for your time.
A huge thank you to Pennington's Manches Cooper for their support, and to Nick for those great insights on the Singapore market. This sets us up really well for our first panel, who will be looking at raising capital in the region. We're thrilled to have with us Sean Han, General Partner at Motion Ventures, Christina Linge, CEO and co-founder of River, and Colin Ip, Head of Inward Investment at the UK Department of International Trade. They'll be moderated by Rachel Defoe, Founding and Managing Director of Redify. There's time for Q&A, so please do send in questions. Rachel?
Thanks so much, Leslie. I'm really excited to be speaking here with this incredible panel that we have here with you today. As Leslie mentioned, please do bring your questions to the table. We'll be answering them after. Without further ado, I'd like to jump right into it with, first of all, a founder herself, Christina. Do tell us a little bit more about River's journey to get here, as well as your fundraising story.
Yeah, I'm happy to share a little bit about that. I'm originally from Denmark, and we relocated to Singapore in 2019, but it wasn't until we actually came to the region, had a lot of meetings here, and met a lot of amazing people, and found out more about the Singaporean ecosystem for startups. And then a bright person then said to us, if you're not here or have a present, you can forget about doing business in the region. So that was like an eye-opener for us, because from Denmark, you would easily bridge into Europe or the other Scandinavian countries. So having to think about actually relocating was like a big decision, but honestly, it was a no-brainer. So it didn't take us more like a month. Then we're like packing the containers, and then we moved here in November.
Amazing. And since you've come here, you know, River's gone on to do a fundraise recently, especially. Could you tell us a little bit more about that journey and what it was like meeting with investors here?
Yeah. We were first told that we should be aware that fundraising, of course, takes a long time, and we're like, yeah, sure, a long time. You read about it, you hear other people's stories. It's usually 6 to 12 months-ish. And everyone says, remember to have a lot of runway left. And we're like, yeah, sure, we got this. But I don't think I had imagined it would be like a 2-year process. So our investor, we actually met for the first time 2 years ago. So it was the beginning of a very long relationship before it actually ended into an investment into River that was just announced in January this year.
Amazing. Sean, could you tell us a little bit more about, I guess from a VC's point of view, what does the fundraising journey look like for companies coming into the region?
Yeah, well, first of all, congratulations, Christina, on the very successful fundraise. You finally got there. I think that speaks volume to a lot of startups that have set out. And I think the sort of landscape is such that, you know, there's capital chasing so many deals. And some naturally just get prioritized, some naturally just get put into the back burner. And so it's so nice when we can see startups successfully fundraise. The landscape getting capital in the region. So I think first of all, I'll generalize a little bit for Southeast Asia, right, or Singapore for the matter. I think that relative, I'll speak broadly about maybe 2 distinct regions. I think one is the US. One is Singapore in this case. And I think where in the US, we're seeing so much capital in the market. And because there's so much capital chasing the same volume of deals, you know, I think investors have to decide much faster, or they end up losing out on deals. So they don't have the sort of luxury of waiting. And in Southeast Asia, or in Singapore in this case, I think the process can be longer, because from a VC perspective, there's also less, or they in the past had less competition, but I think there's also more capital coming to the market now, and that's changing a little bit. Or maybe that sort of time difference is maybe quite distinct.
Great, thanks so much for that insight. Colin, what about yourself? I think from where you sit, having that eye, you know, with Singapore startups going overseas as well as external startups coming to Singapore, are there any big trends that you're noticing on your end?
I'll be clear on our role, and it's not as sort of central as that, but we've been very lucky as a government entity that encourages trade and investment to have line of sight of both UK tech, Singapore tech, as much as a bit of the UK VC, but certainly Singapore VC. I think one of the benefits of COVID, if there is a benefit of COVID, is that we spent 2 years talking with Singaporean VCs to really understand their thesis, and each one is very, very different in terms of whether they have a geographical mandate that's global or regional, and whether their sector is very consumer or very business or very deep tech. So we've spent 2 years trying to really understand the VC space here, while at the same time trying to pick the UK tech companies that would obviously match what we're looking for from if we were wearing a VC hat for Singaporeans. Flip side, our other role as a government department is to help Singaporean companies who may have significant funding or at least some scale, but are looking to broaden out their market beyond Singapore. And of course, being UK, we'd like to say, come to UK. You know, 6 million, and you know there'll always be a space for different types of tech. But again, we need to understand the question of what tech are you bringing into the UK. UK is a very competitive market, and certainly there's a bilateral stream of discussions, and that's where our role comes to play here.
What are the top sort of questions that you see from either side?
The questions are very different, actually, because for the UK tech companies, they will always first explore the market. Who's going to buy my tech? Who's going to buy my products? And it's very commercial and it's very B2B processes. So they're not looking to sell to a consumer market here, but looking to sell to corporates, especially MNCs, which they could be working in the UK, but wanted to explore that entry point here. So they've already got scale, they've already got a bit of funding, and so their first point is always about the trade and the opportunities there. You have to tease it out of them to say, actually, are you looking for funding to support that expansion? And then they go, oh yes, that's a good question. And then we develop that conversation from there on in. From the Singapore perspective, I think a lot of it is quite earlier stage. I mean, Singapore being 5.5 million, there's only so much they can do from a consumer part, and a lot of it's consumer-led, and they want to see how they go into the UK in terms of tap into the UK sophistication, the talent, and shall we say, some of the business side of things. So it's a bit of different, and their first port of call when they ask me is, how does government fund me? Which is very different to the conversation from UK Tech. So it's a very different conversation from both sides.
That's so interesting. Christina, what about on your end as a founder? What are the common questions you encounter from investors or even just stakeholders in the ecosystem here?
Some of the questions that I got a lot during the fundraising was very preventive in a way, because they kept asking questions about our numbers, if we knew enough about the market size, and if there were any competitors where we had that competitive advantage and active daily user numbers, etc., instead of more visionary, where are you going with this, what's the potential, where are the opportunities in it, instead of just focusing on numbers, because in the seed stage, of course, it's very difficult to show those metrics for traction because it's such an early stage. So I think we got so many questions, especially on the revenue predictions, and they really wanted us to be very realistic about those.
Yeah, so you successfully raised a round. How did you manage to overcome those questions? Was it a matter of a longer conversation, getting to know them more, or something else entirely?
I think it was a mix of different things. So as I mentioned, our investor, we met 2 years ago. So that was a very long relationship, which was a benefit, I would say, even though when you're in it, you're like, oh, come on, let's close, let's get it over with. Come on, just sign, say yes. But when you are then on the other side and can reflect on it, it actually just helped us getting to know each other a lot better and trying to find out what was it they were looking for, how could we provide that. So it was more like a relationship where they guided us in a way, and they were kind of mentoring us at the same time in a way, because they wanted it. We're not there yet, but eventually we came to that stage. Whereas you read stories and hear stories about others where they're like, after 1 or 2 meetings, they're like, no, sorry, we're not interested at this stage, or you're not having a monthly recurring revenue that is interesting enough at this stage. So.
Interesting. Sean, what about yourself? When we're talking, I guess, about strategic capital, Motion Ventures has a bit of an interesting corporate consortium model. Could you speak a little bit more to that and how it's been received?
Yeah, so just thank you for that. So for context, Motion Venture is, as a VC fund, we're backed by a group of corporates, and largely in the maritime supply chain space, and we try to bring together different competencies from our investors to support portfolios that we invest into. It's been received really well, and I think we started a year ago, and today we just announced an announcement with a company called EverImpact. And what they do, they are an IoT sensor that measures CO2 in cities, in ports, and in vessels as well, right? And the beauty of a consortium collaboration is that we've got a large number of our investors and corporate network to come together, to work together on sort of the technical sort of collaborating on technical side, on the operational side, on putting them on vessels. And that's been such a nice, nice sort of wonderful thing to see industry, different parts of the industry coming together to work together. I think that speaks so much on sort of strategic capital that can be brought onto startups.
Colin, could you share a little bit more as well, I guess, about what is the benefit of having investors in the region in Singapore?
I think it's a great question, and I'll pivot to Christine in a second. But I'll take Sean's sort of lead on that in terms of that. What is the benefits? So I'll give you a live example that we've supported. In 2019, was a UK prop tech company, very innovative in terms of the way they sort of measure space very quickly, very efficiently, and be able to produce effectively a digital twin of your room, your building, your office space. And that's fantastic because it's far more accurate, far more cost effective, and you could do much more sort of overlaying of different types of data to give you the digital twin. And they were out here looking to pitch, as I said, their product, with the usual sort of CDLs, Capital Land, Maple Trees, and all the sort of are the well-known Singaporean real estate players. I asked the question, and it comes to the point is, are you looking to raise capital? And they say, oh yes, who? It just so happens one of the sort of developers that we've named has an innovation team, so a CVC arm, shall we say, corporate ventures arm. And we had a conversation with them, so look, what are your pain points? What are you looking to do? What tech can help you either be more efficient, be more cost effective, be able to be more accurate, whatever it is. And they gave us a list, and this is the kind of things we're looking for. We went back and we gave them some names, of which this prop tech company was one of them. They looked at it, we had a discussion saying, what do you think? Said, this is really interesting. I think we could do something with this tech company. And we basically brought the UK tech company, who wasn't looking for investment, with the innovation arm, who was looking for some tech, and said, let's have a conversation. They had the conversation, and in short, it was basically, look, we've tried your pilot program, we like it so much, we'd actually like to put some money into it. And so they put about 13.9 million into it. It was announced just before lockdown and COVID, and sort of February 2020. And it's taken them 2 years to actually set up strategically their office here. Now, that comes to the point in terms of a strategic conversation whereby this developer has a regional, if not a global network to be able to utilize that prop tech. Now, it's a non-exclusive deal. So that allows the UK company to come here, have a market presence immediately with an existing investor, but also to be able to tap into other, I wouldn't say competitors, but friendly rivals to market the business. So that's a real strategic sort of way of looking how that investment that started off from a pilot program has yielded a very fruitful discussion and continues to be so.
Fantastic.
But I'm going to come to Christine's point of view in terms of how did an investor look at your product as being strategic coming out here?
That's a really good question. I mean, you could say the pandemic really accelerated what we came with. So that helped us in what we were doing, because before that, the industry was a little bit, say, if it ain't broken, why fix it? Which was the challenge. But after everything got a lot more restrictive and regulations required certain things from the pandemic, then it just really helped our use case because it was digital first, and we happened to have that solution that they then desperately needed. So yeah.
That was a great story. Yeah. Sorry, Rach.
No, we love this. We love the organic conversations. Actually, I want to circle back to something you said earlier about sort of like the wish list for the ideal investor. If you were to speak to, I guess for all of you, if you were to speak to other founders, what would you recommend they put on their wish list before they come to Asia?
I'll pass that to Sean first. Gives me time to think.
Wish list for an ideal investor.
Yeah.
So I'm biased, right? So I think my sort of largest hypothesis is that founders in the B2B space struggle the most with sort of the long sales cycle. and how do you sort of move contract to a decision, whether yes or no, faster than the 6, 9, 12 months that we usually see. So we've designed a fund to do that. But certainly that's not the only thing that founders need help with, right? Whether they're moving to any parts of the world. I think one of the biggest struggle for a founding team that's growing with capital, with or without capital, is actually hiring, right? Hiring is one. Even hiring where you're from in your local country is one thing. And I think if you're going to a new country where you're not familiar with that region or that country or that area, how do you hire well over there? I think that's a large problem that's not easy to solve. I think having good network, whether via sort of government support, whether sort of via to investors, could sort of smoothen that process a little bit. So maybe two of my things are helping sales and hiring talent.
What about yourself, Christina, as a founder?
I mean, it wasn't until recently that we were fortunate enough to be able to hire that talent that we then needed, because it is very difficult to find here, especially in Singapore. I mean, it's easier once we go abroad and look at the surrounding neighboring countries like Vietnam or the Philippines or, and India even. There's a lot of tech talent there. But I think for us, the main thing had been the pilot programs, as you mentioned, the corporate co-creation in this phase, because yes, the sales cycle, it's horrific for a startup. So being able to do test bedding with corporate partners in that period of time, so not only do you build your business case and your metrics at the same time as you're raising funds or trying to close sales, I think it's just really important.
Colin, what about yourself?
The wish list from founders. It's a good question, because that's something that we do ask when we speak to UK tech founders. We do say, look, what is your ideal profile of an investor? Because we need to understand what values hold true for you. And that's quite key, because you want founders and investors to have similar values. You want that symmetry. You want that alignment in terms of, as a founder, you have visions, you have aspirations of what you see your company going from A to B to C down the line, and hopefully 5 years, 10 years, 15 years, on the assumption that that is what your vision is. It's not a quick exit IPO scheme. And that's quite key, because for us as a government agency, we don't want to start pitching necessarily any founder to the VCs. We really want to understand that you're in this for the long game. So the first thing is really to ask them the question is about values. It's about your real ambition to be out in Asia. If that's not your ambition to be out in Asia, if you're saying, well, we're actually just looking for money, but our real ambitions is America, then we will probably hold that conversation so they'll come back to us. And that's the truth of the matter. But a lot of founders will say, look, we want a partner, not just in the values, but also in terms of understanding our tech, our business, our product, whatever that is, and be able to leverage their network out in Singapore or out in Asia to be able to sort of promote that product and be able to apply that product in other verticals that the investor may have in terms of the portfolio companies or other networks globally. And I think that's quite key, because it's not just about coming to Singapore, but hopefully Singapore is the regional headquarter base and then be able to expand. But they do need that partner. And that's one of the conversations. And it's not necessarily just a VC. Some don't want VC. Some things the VC will, for different sort of profiling, isn't suited. They may want a corporate VC who have, shall we say, core businesses that may be able to bring that tech in, embed it in, and be able to actually say, look, we could do something else with that tech, with other parts of their sort of portfolio core businesses. So it's quite a difficult conversation. It's not a difficult conversation. It's a very sort of nuanced conversation, because it varies differently, because the wants and needs of both sides will vary quite a bit. So it's a good point. It's a good question, but I think everybody needs to ask that check. What is your wish list founder? What is your wish list investor?
Yeah, brilliant. We've actually got some questions from the audience, so thank you so much for these Q&As. I'll start with one here that's just come through. So compared to the last 12 to 24 months, what are the prospects for Singapore startups to raise funds over the next 12?
Is that for me?
Let's start with you.
I wasn't sure. I think it's been better than ever, to be honest. I think that, and the reason for that it's because more VCs are either raising new funds in Singapore, or there are new VCs coming into Singapore with new funds. And when there are new funds, that just means there are capital to deploy into startups, right? And two, I think it's really encouraging to see that accelerate even during that sort of COVID pandemic period, right? We haven't seen a slowdown for fundraise. So I think the prospects is great for founders. I think I go back to Christina's point on difficulty of hiring talent here. I think it's not that there's a scarcity of talent per se.
No, absolutely not.
I think it's really more that there's so many options for when you're a good talent, right? You can go to any of like the Googles, the Apples, the Facebooks of Singapore. And then as startups, as new VCs, how do you sort of bring and attract talent more competitively?
Fantastic. So we've got another question here, actually. So this particular person has asked or said, I've heard businesses and founders are shifting from Hong Kong and China to Singapore. Is this true? And if so, how has this affected the market? Colin, maybe you want to take this one?
Oh, as a government representative here, I will have to be very diplomatic in the conversation. I think it's anecdotal. I think it's part anecdotal in terms of any of the businesses, and then if you look at it from a logical capital flow perspective and understanding the geopolitics of what's happening in Hong Kong, for one. Secondly, obviously the COVID management regime in Hong Kong and how that impacts business. I think from that kind of level, there is kind of obviously a dialogue that you think moving here. Is there evidence that that is true in terms of capital flow? It's always been the case that people will shift capital where they feel that that capital will be safe, it will generate returns in a very stable environment. I think that goes for whether it's from Hong Kong to Singapore or from Switzerland to anywhere else, or from UK. I don't think that is particular of that link. What I can say is obviously as rentals increase and shall we say sort of is a return before COVID. I mean, maybe that is a linkage, that there are people basing themselves here, more of a strategic play rather than in Hong Kong. That remains to be seen and borne out by true data. But there's obviously evidence that could possibly support that.
Great, thanks so much.
Politically correct.
Thank you.
All right, we've got another question here, and maybe I'll throw this one to you, Christina. Are businesses in certain sectors having more success raising capital than others? In your conversations with founders, have you heard of any interesting movements there?
Yeah, both yes and no. I think depending on how many regional players there already are in the segment that you are in, it's of course more difficult to raise. So I can only speak from my own experience, but when we had all of these conversations with different VCs in the area, you could hear that, they were trying to figure out the landscape because there were similarities either in Indonesia or Malaysia or somewhere else, or maybe even here in Singapore. So if you are in an already crowded space, I would say, of course, it's more difficult to raise than if you were in a blue water ocean, so to say. So I think it's the same anywhere, not just Singapore.
Amazing, thank you. And I think we're about to wrap up for this panel. One last thing that I'll ask everyone here. If you could describe, the raising capital environment in Singapore in 3 words or less, what would you say?
3 words. It's neither a lot or little to describe.
You go first.
I think about it. We'll let our residential expert, Colin. 3 words, Colin.
3 words. Be smart. That's first of all. Be smart in what your ask is. Come with a very, very good strategic entry plan into Singapore and the region. And thirdly, be patient. spend time here. And it's not a one-off, spend lots of time here engaging to understand how it really works out. So those aren't the words, those are three bullet points, I think.
Yeah, I think I would definitely second that in terms of patient. I experienced that myself, and the relocation was absolutely necessary if you want to do business in this area coming from Europe or Scandinavia as I do. And then I think it's also, as you say, know your worth in terms of your value propositions. You need to be super clear on that. And then also in terms of be sure to do your own due diligence in terms of what investors are you actually getting involved with? Is that something where you share the same long-term outlook on the future, of course? So are we going in the same direction? If not, then it's a waste of everyone's time, really. Yeah.
I'll offer maybe a different perspective to be patient. Just to play devil's advocate, I think there's something to be said about as a startup, if you're fundraising, how can you drive urgency better? Right? Can you put VCs up for competition against each other, right? So then people can start making decisions faster and making that whole process a little bit better. I think number one is figuring out how to drive urgency smartly, to Colin's point. And secondly, I think it's how do you risk mitigate, right? So I think a lot of investors in the region are new to game relative to how long Silicon Valley's been around. And so I think when investors are trying to mitigate, to what Christina said earlier, is you start asking for a lot of numbers, right? Just to justify why you should do it, right? But if you can risk mitigate well, get your sales contract in, get your hires in, get your team in place, I think you have a much better chance of just moving that sort of process forward from a fundraising perspective.
Fantastic. Thank you to this wonderful panel for all the insights you've shared today. Looking forward to hearing from the next few guests that we have on the show too. Thank you.
Thank you to our panel for that fabulous discussion. It's clear there's great opportunity here in Singapore, and congratulations from all of us to Christina as well on her successful fundraise. Up next, we'd like to introduce Kenneth Lure of Singapore's Economic Development Board. The EDB is an integral part of Singapore's tech ecosystem and operates really collaboratively within the community. It's important to get to know them and to understand what they do in considering any expansion in the region. Kenneth will be in conversation with Valerie Lim, head of APAC programs at IoT Tribe. Kenneth, I think we'll start with your slides, but I'll pass over to Valerie.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Valerie Lim, and I'm the head of programs at IoT Tribe. With me today is Kenneth Le from EDB, and I'll now hand over to him, who will actually take you through a presentation on why Singapore and what EDB is here to offer.
Thanks, Valerie. Good morning to everyone tuning in from the UK. It's great to see everyone virtually. I'm pleased to be given the opportunity to share more about Singapore and what the EDB does. Right. So what comes to mind when you think about Singapore? Right. It could be us being a clean and green city. It could be us being that great little dot that offers a great place to live and work in. Well, all this has somewhat got to do with the Singapore Economic Development Board. The Singapore Economic Development Board, EDB for short, next slide, is a lead agency that plans and executes economic and industry development strategies for Singapore. So what does that mean, right? So we partner global corporations to grow their footprint in Singapore with the aim of positioning Singapore as the global center for business, innovation, and talent. Right, so fun fact, actually the EDB is responsible for more than 30% of Singapore's annual gross domestic product across the manufacturing and tradables services sector. Next slide. So you might wonder, how does the EDB work with corporations today? So for companies looking to expand and grow in Singapore, we first and foremost offer information on the business landscape in Singapore, right? We also offer connections to industry partners, so to help you source for talent, to help you foster like-minded collaborations. Lastly, we also offer access to government support for investments that align with Singapore's growth and transformation agenda. Next slide. This slide shows a quick snapshot of some of Singapore's key pillars of growth. Right? So Singapore today continues to support and attract a diverse range of industries, ranging from aerospace to electronics and energy and chemicals. Right? And aside from these specific industry verticals, Singapore has also over time established global leadership positions in some of the horizontal thematic areas, such as advanced manufacturing, supply chain, hub services, and digital. So next slide. When we think about Singapore, we often don't just think about Singapore alone, right? But also about the broader Asia region. Next slide. Asia today is actually, in fact, the world's largest economic bloc and the greatest consumption hub. And Southeast Asia in particular, driven by rising urbanization and an expanding middle class, is in fact poised to become the world's fourth largest economy by 2030, right? And so a lot of companies today are looking into Southeast Asia as their second home. Southeast Asia, in fact, next slide please, is also said to be entering the digital decade, fueled by a rising resurgence in the digital economy. The region is expected to rake in, US $1 trillion in gross merchandise value by 2030, and is today a hotbed for many VC investments. In last year alone, Southeast Asia has witnessed a doubling of the number of startups that have entered the elite unicorn status, right? So 25 out of the 46 unicorns currently in Southeast Asia were actually minted in 2021 alone. Right, in sum, right, there's plenty of opportunities in Southeast Asia ripe and ready for companies to seize and capture. And as we think about Singapore and Southeast Asia, Singapore is a natural access point and gateway, right? And this is not just because of our connectivity and livability, but also because of our openness to business and talent, our reputation as a trusted hub, and also the access we provide in terms of our vibrant and resilient tech ecosystem. So let me elaborate on this a little bit more. Next slide. First and foremost, I think many leading enterprises today have chosen to set up their regional headquarters in Singapore. So as you look at the slide, it's a huge statistic that we have. 46% of Asia's regional headquarters are based in Singapore today. This includes the like of UK-based firms such as Dyson, as well as Unilever, who has chosen Singapore as their choice location of hub to orchestrate their regional business and operations. Next slide, please. And these companies have chosen Singapore not just to perform headquarter functions, right? But they have also established innovation outfits here to develop new products and services. So for instance, Unilever a few years back developed their foundry in Singapore that brought together startups and entrepreneurs to innovate new solutions in consumer products. And Dyson, if you have seen the news, has more recently also, as part of its global HQ, announced plans to hire 250 more engineers and scientists in Singapore over the next 5 years, to grow capabilities in machine learning, in robotics, and energy storage. Next slide. And in their journey to actually grow new businesses, many of these companies have leveraged Singapore's vibrant tech and startup ecosystem, right? Today, we have a growing base of corporate innovation partners, research institutes, as well as funding enablers that can help you kickstart this journey. Next slide, please. So aside from companies that have an established presence in Singapore, I think what's interesting for us is that we are also starting to see greater interest from UK-based startups and growth companies to expand into Singapore, right? One such example is fintech neobank Revolut, which has grown tremendously over the last 2 years, right? So in spite of the COVID-19 pandemic, Revolut through Singapore has actually amassed 77,000 new customers in the region, right? Through Singapore, Revolut has also innovated new products and services to better serve its customers, and going forward is looking to expand into other Southeast Asia markets through Singapore. Next slide. Another startup that has a growing presence in Singapore is Parcel Platform, which is a cloud-based logistic platform that seeks to connect merchants to e-commerce shipping carriers, right? So Parcel Platform was attracted, right, by the ease of access to funding in Singapore, as well as our diverse range of VC investors, right? That they have decided to set Singapore as its base to raise funds and grow its operations. In its latest funding round that took place in August last year, Parcel Platform actually raised $20 million from the likes of Cambridge Capital as well as SoftBank. Next slide. And so, like the stories of Revolut and Parcel Platform, we would like to see more, UK startups and companies and founders, make their breakthrough in Asia through Singapore. And EDB, alongside our partners, are here to help you along the way, right? So from initial market sensing to deepening your presence in the Singapore ecosystem, and even to supporting your capability development efforts, we can help to accelerate your growth at any stage of your growth journey. And one quick way to do so is to join our open innovation platform. Next slide. Right, is to join our own open innovation platform where you can access problem statements that are being hosted by corporates and government agencies in Singapore. Right, so the open innovation platform today has hosted more than 235 challenges across industry verticals such as consulting, public services, the built environment sector, and it has helped new entrants into Singapore grow and scale their operations. Next slide. And so with that, if you're interested to set up in Singapore and to find out more about Singapore or the region, feel free to reach out to us. The EDB today has teams both in Singapore as well as in overseas markets, including the UK. So feel free to reach out to us via emails stated in this slide. We have also prepared, some digital resources that we have prepared that can help startup and founders along your growth journey. So one such example is the next slide. Is the Singapore's Tech Ecosystem Guidebook that we have developed more recently. It would provide you a glimpse into the fintech landscape in the region, as well as tips on how to grow and scale your business in Asia. So you can download this guide using the QR code on this slide, or download it from the EDB website as well. On the EDB website, there are also a few other digital resources that you can refer to help kickstart your business. One such resource is the events calendar, which will give you a good snapshot of some of the events that are taking place in Singapore and our overseas markets. We also have some tools such as the startup cost calculator, which can give growth companies a quick snapshot of what is the cost, right, to set up your business in Singapore. And so with that, I've come to the end of my short sharing about Singapore and the EDB. Feel free to reach out to me if you have any questions. Otherwise, the EDB looks forward to partnering you to grow your business through Singapore. Thank you.
Much, Kenneth, for that insightful presentation. So now we have a few questions for you. We know that EDB has managed to engage with lots of companies throughout COVID. So can you talk a bit more about how have you adjusted through this pandemic?
So I think the COVID-19 pandemic has really been challenging for businesses, and EDB included. And why that is so is because a lot of our work is premised on having a face-to-face interaction with our clients, right? So when COVID-19 first hit us, we had to adjust very quickly, right? So we managed to move a lot of our physical engagements online, right? And so meetings that used to take place physically could take place virtually, right? Physical marketing and investment promotion trips that took place physically, we also managed to change them to virtual meetings as well. And I think the more important thing for us is to maintain the cadence of our engagements with our companies, and that's something that I felt that we have done very swiftly and done very well. On this note, I think another point that I would like to make is also how it was very important for the EDB to make sure that Singapore remained open towards business, especially during the COVID-19 pandemic, right? So the EDB fought very hard to keep our trade lanes open, right, so that goods can continue flowing. We fought very hard to allow essential businesses, right, to continue operating in Singapore, right, even though physical workplaces were shut. And I think that has really bore fruit for us because throughout this period, business confidence in Singapore have really strengthened, right? And as companies look to diversify their operations into Asia, Singapore becomes a natural access point and gateway for us today. So, and one interesting note is that actually, in fact, during the two years of the COVID-19 pandemic, EDB has continued to perform well in attracting investments into Singapore. So in 2020 alone, we actually surpassed expectations and brought in $17.8 billion of investments in 2020. So I thought that was a significant achievement and also testament to how we have kept businesses running and operations running despite the pandemic.
That's really impressive, Kenneth. So we have a question from the audience. So Singapore is building a great reputation for fintech. So what are the other tech verticals where you think Singapore is strong or are looking to develop?
So that's a very good question. I think tech is a very broad, horizontal, and I think what excites me most about the Singapore tech ecosystem is its applications, right, in many different industry verticals, right? So you could look at what we are currently doing in the mobility space, right, where we're looking at autonomous and electric vehicles, right, and even in the vehicles itself, we're looking at how to make it more connected, right? So that's one example of how tech is being increasingly developed. Even on the topic of mobility, we're looking at commercial applications. We're looking at electric vertical takeoff and landing kind of applications for not just personal use, but also commercial use. So imagine a future where your goods and parcels can be delivered by helicopters right to your doorstep. Right, so that's a vision that we are trying to bring into distinct reality in time to come. Right, we are also seeing tech being deployed in maybe, say, for instance, the public services sector. Right, so I think GovTech and the Singapore National Digital Government Office is also looking at how to deploy tech in government services. Right, so how can the Singapore population access all our services, payment services, digitally, right? So I think that's another angle that we are trying to work at. So in sum, I think there are many applications for the tech ecosystem. And what excites me most, as I said, is really about the boundless opportunities that tech can provide.
Great. So you guys are the ultimate experts on expanding businesses into Singapore. So what do you think is the most important thing for a founder or company to consider before starting the whole process?
That's a very good question. I think for companies that have yet to make the decision to come to Singapore, I would say in considering your next investment location, think about stability, right? Which location offers you a clarity of regulations, right? Which location is able to offer you reliable infrastructure? Which location is able to offer you stable policies, right? And an agile environment to test bid new ideas and to really scale quickly. And I think I must say that for Asia, Singapore really truly stands out as one of the most attractive countries to do so, right? And on the other hand, if you've already made the decision to invest in Singapore, then I think the question is to think about what positioning you want to be in, right? Because today there are many established industries in Singapore, and there are a lot of strong incumbents in these industries, right? So a new startup or a new founder must really think about what kind of distinct positioning you're trying to drive at, right? Especially if you're looking to disrupt a traditional industry, right? So understanding your client problem statement is of utmost importance, right? And so you need to think about whether your strategy is to differentiate from the current incumbents or to actually collaborate, right, with the current incumbents. And another point I would raise is also the point on scale, right? And as I shared earlier in my presentation, right? When we think about Singapore, it's not just about the Singapore market alone, but it's often about the broader Asia region, right? How can Singapore be the hotspot, be the hub for your company to expand into the other region, right? And I think successful companies that have managed to navigate that have gone on to do very well in this space. Yeah.
Thank you very much, Kenneth. So just to end off, could you remind us how best founders and executives can reach out to EDB directly?
Great. So as I mentioned earlier, I think EDB has many offices overseas. I think we have 19 offices overseas, including Singapore. So feel free to reach out to us through the emails, right? As well as any in-market events that you might attend. And I think EDB prides ourselves as the first point of contact for global corporations. So feel free to reach out to us if you have any kind of need or any plans to expand into Asia. We can be your point of contact, and we can help to direct you to the right person, right, to support your growth journey here in Singapore.
Thank you very much, Kenneth, and thanks everyone for attending this panel. Yeah. We'll now back to Leslie.
Thanks so much to Kenneth and Val. We can't overstate how valuable EDB support can be for companies looking to expand into the region. They do fabulous work. We highly recommend engaging with their website and taking advantage of the guides that they have available online, or reaching out to them directly. Next up, we'll dig into market entry strategies. We're thrilled to have with us Unmish Parthasarathi, founder and executive director of Pictureboard Partners, Sagar Gupta, startup partner lead at Stripe, and Tom Tilley, digital trade network officer at the British High Commission. Unfortunately, Anuj Jain of Startup O had a last-minute emergency, but his colleague, Sudeep Sarma, managing partner at Startup O, has kindly agreed to join us in his stead. Rachel Defoe of Redefy moderates. Rachel.
Thanks so much, Leslie. Really glad to be back here with another brilliant panel. Looking forward to another really insightful conversation. We'll keep it organic, we promise. I think without further ado, let's jump into the first question, shall we? So the first one that we have here is, what are the practical options available for expanding into Asia, and what factors should companies consider when assessing these options? Sudeep, let's start with
Great, thank you. So in terms of the practical options, it's, I guess, fairly simple. It's remote or physical, and then within physical, it's incorporate or partner. The decision processes then and the things to consider. Remote physical is really, I'd say, primarily a sales process question. Are you selling it digitally? In which case you can have a good go at trying to do it remotely. Or alternatively, do you rely on human sales, human implementation, and then you're down that physical path. The partner versus go direct and incorporate, I think really for me is a question of how much risk do you think you're taking with this decision, and the honesty of that assessment process as well. The risks come from your ability to grow the business quickly, and I would say the first thing you've got to honestly ask yourself is, can I articulate why a client, and I deal mainly with business to business, I should say, why should they buy my product and now, and so you can't articulate it. If it's just a really cool idea and you're just hoping that they love your idea and that they'll go with it, it's going to take a long, long time, and you're really relying on relationships to give you that warmth and time of day. The moment you're heading down that direction, you're into relationships, and that's taking you into partnerships. And I think you're either then looking at resellers or alternatively a build, operate, transfer proposition, which is where we do.
What about you?
I try and keep it simple. I think there are three things. One, what part of Asia? You want to go into Europe, you say you want to go into Central Europe, DACH region, Scandinavia, Western Europe, Southern Europe, Italy, Balkans, as the case might be. So don't treat Asia as a monolith. That's probably one. Secondly, why Asia? So a lot of times companies are coming in for diversification. They're coming in because it's tick box to the board. They're coming in for revenue because of what they've heard, not seen or validated. So, where in Asia, why in Asia? And then typically from there, to your point about timelines, what does success looks like? Typically, we sort of, 3 months, 6 months, 12, 18, 24. Because I think those are really the foundational, practical stuff that we try and get out of the way, because as he says, a lot of the times we are trading on reputation and contacts. So you got to be sure that the card you're going to play is going to resonate with the person across the table, because you're going to be doing business with him or her for the next 5-10 years. So you got to make sure that what you do put on the table is palatable. No point giving a big steak to a vegan kind of thing. So yeah, that's where I would start, really. Just why and where and then by when.
Great questions. Maybe to go on to a second one here, Tom, what are the biggest hurdles companies need to anticipate when they do come into the region?
Yeah, so I think the first for me is, as Umesh mentioned, this isn't a single market. So people tend to talk about coming to Asia. It's a huge mistake. There's a massive variation in the opportunities and the complexities of the markets that are available, and you can't address it in one bite. And I'd advise companies to also be really, really careful. If someone is telling you that they've got a one-size-fits-all solution, if you're looking at a hire in the region and they tell you they can do it all, you should be very, very wary, because you could spend a lifetime trying to understand the difference in copy culture between one market and another. The second I'd say is hiring. It's really, really tough at this point to hire in this market unless you've got a really good proposition for staff, you've got a really good and compelling offer. And that's a huge sign of why this market is exciting, right? Because if you've got devs or salespeople kind of lying around queuing up, begging to take the opportunity, that's a sign the market's past its peak. So the fact that there's competition for staff is a really good sign. And the final thing is, it is competitive here. So we see a lot of companies coming from Europe and the US that don't know the ecosystem, don't know the players that are here. There are really strong local companies in these markets. You ought to understand who they are, what they do, and how your product lines up. And don't let that competition put you off, because actually Singapore's turning into sort of another major tech cluster. So if you can get in amongst that mix, exciting things can happen. But you shouldn't underestimate, that you're going to have to really fight and demonstrate value if you want to expand in this region.
Brilliant. So what about you? Could you tell us a little bit more about company's expansion story over here?
Yeah, so I work at Stripe, which is a payments company, and we grew out of the US. I guess our philosophy around this has always been, we need to get our core markets right, because there's always that trade-off between defocusing on domestic market and continue building that out, and at what point do you start investing in international spaces. And for us, it was quite clear on two parameters, where are we going to have big impact to our business, and where do we have reasonable ease in expansion. And so we started out thinking a bit about Europe, because there was a little bit more understanding for us. Then we quickly realized that the impact of being out in Asia was really big, but it was challenging. And we came over to Asia about 5 years ago, and there's fragmentation in the market. For us, we didn't have as much expertise. And we have built that. And I think Singapore has been and always been our hub. And through that, we're now starting to add new countries. But, I think that it's really great to have advisors and investors who have helped us with that journey. And we've still got a long way to go. And so we're learning.
Amazing. Siddhi, maybe you could talk a little bit more about some hurdles you've seen on your end. What are some of the common ones with coming into this region?
It'd be echoing largely, actually, a lot of the things that we've talked about. The thing that I see most often, and I've flagged it already, but I'll just repeat it, is this sort of, why is this company going to buy your product and now? I just can't emphasize enough. And recognize then that if you've got to nurture relationships over time, then you've got to be able to think about all the other collateral that you're going to want to have. It's not just a question of having people on the ground. You need to think about how you're going to maintain the presence, the relationship with them. And the other hurdle, I'd say, building on something that Tom had flagged, is given how diverse Asia is, and I talked about relationships in the context of the product, but the reality is there are certain countries here where they really work on relationships. It doesn't even actually matter if you can articulate the reasons to act and now. They're going to want someone local that they know and trust, had relationships with, and trying to circumvent that system is a fool's errand, I would say. So recognizing that certain locations across Asia operate that way and planning for that accordingly would be another key feature.
So, just to build on that, maybe this is an open question for everyone. When you do face that hurdle, what's the best way to navigate it? Because, like you mentioned, certain markets in Asia are very relationship driven. So what's the first step to breaking that barrier?
I'm going to take my neck out. Any deal is relationship driven. Any deal worth having, any deal worth growing, anything worth investing in is relationship driven. If the cultural context is known to you, and if the legal jurisdiction allows recourse to justice, then the variability and the emphasis and the value of the relationship, where it's trust and face and name, goes down. But any deal, anywhere, whether it is for material gain or non-material gain, is fundamentally, it's got to do with a relationship. That's very fundamentally important. From Wall Street to Washington to Warsaw to Wollongong and all the other W's in the world, it's the same thing in the world. That's my first point. Second thing, I think from an Asian perspective, I often joke with clients and partners, saying, listen to the silences. If you in certain cultures, if you ask the question, it's a very hierarchical answer you get depending on who's in the room. So a lot of time is pre-meetings, and you sort of prepare the round and actually work out, so that the meeting's about two things only: either information exchange formally, so it's minuted, or it's approval. So you then start looking at the real practicalities of what do you want to get from which environment and what forum with who. So it's literally like telling a child how to eat. because it's a very new way of existence. So I put my neck out and say every deal is relationship based anywhere in the world, except the two variables are whether you have the recourse to justice, and relationships and trust are a countermeasure to not having legal recourse. But it takes two to tango.
Oh, I was just going to add one thing, which is I feel like there's going to be so many of these kind of issues as you're launching a new market. And obviously one of the critical things is getting the right team. And so as we thought about how we structure our new expansion teams, one, we always have someone very senior at the company that does a lot of the scoping, because you want someone senior to be invested, to get all the resources. So if you're a seed or Series A, you should be a founder that should probably be doing this. Then you want to think about what's the pod that goes to set these things up. And like for Uber, for instance, they would have their GM that would be like one part of their pod, which would be someone local who can manage some of these relationships, has a good knowledge of the local market. Then they would have their driver operations person and digital marketer. I guess, I don't know, if you're watching this, you might want to think, well, what would your pod look like to help you navigate all of the kind of complexities that are going to happen when you're setting up?
Yeah, I think that point about internal advocates is so important. Does anyone else have any thoughts about, or I guess examples where you've seen where it's been super necessary?
Yeah, it's clear. I think it depends on the stages of the company. So I think if you're a Series A sort of company, 1-2 million looking to expand, it's really that point about the founders just being behind it and wanting it to happen. As it gets bigger, Stripe, it was already a large US company, Western company by the time it come out. Then you've really got to start thinking about the stakeholders. And given the pace at which a company like that grows as well, that access and confidence that you're going to have the budget to grow with it becomes ever critical. So having worked in sort of large banks in the past and sort of seen market entry in a context like that, then you definitely got to think about all of the different dimensions of who's going to support you and when. In the context of smaller companies that are looking to expand, it's really that founder commitment to it. And that reality check about it. It's easy to say I want growth. Yeah, of course I'm committed, but are they being realistic in those growth expectations as well?
One thing not to neglect as you're thinking about these pods and when you're making your initial hires in these markets is what we've seen happen sometimes is companies don't invest the necessary time in the teams that they build here to really bring them into the culture. So they come out, they scope the market, they say let's go, they maybe have a couple of people here and they hire a local team, and that local team doesn't get the investment in terms of the culture, the sort of secret sauce that makes your startup attractive, makes it work, and you cannot neglect that because the team here is going to be very separated from you in terms of time zones. If you're in Europe, you're going to get a small window each day, no matter how hard driving you are, to talk to them and to start to inform that culture. So you should be investing effort and energy either upfront with senior stakeholders coming out here, spending decent amounts of time with those first hires, or bringing them to your base of operations so that they're growing your company, not growing a sort of a kind of a fork of your company that is actually, got the branding but doesn't have that secret sauce, because that is what is making you successful and getting you to the point of expanding in the first place.
If I can add sort of the recipient side, 20 years ago, I was the first India hire for a UK headquartered American sports media company called IMG, the International Management Group. And I was hired fundamentally because I had, played certain sports, I spoke certain languages, and I'd been sort of, an apprentice journalist. That was how it happened. What they did very quickly, and we grew, I still say we grew to 70 headcount by 18 months, if you recall my cadence, and 140 within 24, some crazy numbers. But in the first 12 months, to Tom's point, there were about 14 of us. And the top 4 or 5 of us was sent to London for a 2-week shadowing. And what really helped was the conversations we had at the pub after work with people. That's when we really worked out which football team and all the rest of that. And those relationships then actually worked over time because there was someone back at base who knew who you were and had some context. And there were 4 of us out of the 14 who eventually went on sort of 2 weeks every 3 months. And that really, really helped. I think if we hadn't done that in hindsight, going from 14 to 40 to 70 to 120, that would have been a very brittle foundation. So totally agree with you.
One question for you, Sagar. What about the ways that Asia makes it easy to expand into?
Yeah, so again, like I think we work with a lot of startups that are going through this process, be it European or US founders. Like for one, really simple, but just language, like the common law system that makes it quite easy to do business. Similarly, even though there are some areas in which it's really competitive, there are some areas that there are tons of customers looking for innovation. There's a lot of deep tech solutions that are really there's a lot of customers that are looking to purchase and procure. And so I guess I would kind of recommend try and find out who your customers are, where are there good opportunities. And I really do feel there are a lot of institutions, we work very closely with the EDB, we have an account manager who supports us. There are a lot of really great support you can get. You just need to invest time in finding them out.
Brilliant. And we have a question here from the audience actually, which is, in this current climate, can Singapore still act as a launch pad to other markets, for example, like China or, others in the region, Asia?
I go.
Sure.
Yes, short answer, absolutely yes. Again, for the same reasons that Sagar mentioned, common law, language. I think travel connectivity, safety, the recourse from COVID and the pandemic. Insurance companies willing to sort of, give you deals where if you're traveling, you come back, you can be looked after. Clear guidance on what are the bases for you to come back into Singapore. Whereas a lot of countries around the region have sort of moved, so you don't quite know, what you need to do to come in and go out. So yeah, by all means. I mean, a lot of times, I would say 8 times out of 10, when people say, look, we want to sort of go into Bombay or Shanghai or Jakarta, we always say, come into Singapore, get the holdco going, or get your Asian subsidiary here, get used to it, get your lawyer, get your accountant, all that kind of stuff, and then fly out. It's far easier to do it that way rather than go to Bombay and then having to sort of, double back.
One more question from the audience, actually. Has COVID made it tougher to grow businesses here? How has COVID, in Singapore, we're sort of in this next phase where we're opening up and saying hi to everybody. But how has it been for businesses here, and how should we adjust our market strategies differently?
So I'd say, it's been a double-edged sword, as it has been everywhere, right? So on the one hand, it's become easier from growth because the mindset of consumers has been to adopt things far faster. But on the other side, to the point about everything being relationships, it's been really hard to do that. So I think depending on what your business is, how it works, it sort of swings and roundabouts.
I think if you had an existing relationship, it deepened. Simply because the thing with COVID, unlike SARS or any of the others, was it was a global phenomenon. So everybody was used to a new way of working. So if you had existing relationships, the cost of breaking up and starting somewhere else was much higher than making what you already have. But starting new stuff and laying a foundation for a new relationship, that became harder. That definitely was our experience. Sorry, Tom.
No, one of the things that was really highlighted by this for us is what a good sort of digital game Singapore runs in terms of bringing companies in. So, if Singapore was on Tinder, it would be a true power user because Singapore transmits precisely what it's looking for, right? So you go and look at the IMDA Open Innovation Platform, you go and look at EDB, the Research Enterprise Innovation Strategy. Singapore is telling you online, without you needing to come here, what it wants, where the priorities are, and how to get them. You've got the Open Innovation Platform, so you can begin that journey. And everyone in Singapore is on LinkedIn. So I have a terrible LinkedIn profile, but it's required here. And actually, senior stakeholders at companies and in government will engage with you if you have an interesting proposition. So you can do a lot of pitching, you can do a lot of research, and even engagement online, whatever is going on with COVID, and hopefully it's going in one direction only. But even if that's the case, you should be using these digital resources here.
Brilliant. Thanks so much for that. And maybe just one last question to ask as well. I think the topic of talent has come up quite a bit. What is the best way to access talent and lock them in? Sagar, maybe.
Yeah. It's really a really big challenge. But I guess this is one where storytelling really comes in, and particularly when you're a founder. Like, storytelling is critical to attract resources from investors, but every person that you hire is a resource that you need to get from somewhere else. all of the tech talent, like sadly, have offers probably from Google, Facebook, maybe even Stripe. And you have to try and think, like, how am I going to compete with some of these people? And startups really do have a lot more going for them. They can move faster. They can offer so much more in terms of equity. And so I guess it's just trying to build your strategy. What kind of people are we hiring? Maybe it's not the people that have a lot of families, that have a lot of opportunity risk. Maybe it's going for a younger type of person where they are seeing the 10-year potential, and just building that story, having it consistent, sharing it in the right channels should hopefully try and help you to win the talent war. I think there are some other strategies that you can think about is if you can't pay the salaries, like where some places you can outsource to, and lots of strategies with like remote hiring, but those would be my headline thoughts.
Amazing. Anyone else here has any thoughts on the people side?
I'd build on what Sivaj just said in terms of if you can't do the sort of good things he's describing, just find a vendor and sort of go down that path. But inherently, I think still people want to develop and grow. And so if you're giving an opportunity for people to be able to do that and coach them, particularly this sort of more younger talent, you're not going to just leave them alone. They'll value the guidance that you're giving them, and I think stay with you. But I think we hear all the stories of high turnover and people, therefore you don't want to hire because they leave you a few months later for another pay rise. But I think it also speaks to other issues that, not always, but often I think there are other causes to behind that as well.
Sure. Thanks so much. And maybe if I could ask one last thing from each of you, if you could give one piece of advice, if the audience remembers nothing else, what should somebody consider when it comes to the market strategy to come into Asia?
Is now the right time?
Why? If you want to come and why now?
Just hire the right team.
I'd say seek transformational commercial mandates.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, everyone, for joining. And that brings us to the end of this panel.
A huge thank you to the panel. Sagar and his team at Stripe have generally offered support to all attendees today, including free one-on-one advice on scaling. We'll be sending around a link to all attendees with details of that, so watch out for that. It's a wonderful way to find some support. Before we close, a message from Global Tech Advocates and London Tech Advocates founder, Russ Shaw, CBE. I'll pass over to Russ.
Hi, everyone. My name is Russ Shaw, and I'm the founder of Global Tech Advocates and also Tech London Advocates. And it's been great to join you for your event today. My thanks to Leslie and Sean for organizing the event and leading Tech Singapore Advocates. I think they're doing a fantastic job. As we collectively come through the pandemic, it's clear that Singapore has the momentum to be a world-leading tech hub and one of the most vibrant in Asia Pacific, focusing on fintech, on smart cities, and climate tech, amongst others. There are strong ties between Singapore and the UK, especially as we look at areas like fintech. And Tech Singapore Advocates launched back in 2017 at Eden Hall, so that UK-Singapore, the ties between UK and Singapore are an integral part of our community. With Tech Singapore Advocates and having TSA as part of Global Tech Advocates, we can really help tech leaders in Singapore be connected to entrepreneurs, investors, corporate leaders, and many others globally. We have GTA groups in over 20 tech hubs and regions around the world, and we're about to add several more in the year ahead. London Tech Week arrives on the 13th of June. Tech London Advocates is a co-founding partner for the week, and the Singapore EDB is planning to participate as well, which is fantastic. We're also planning a next Global Tech Advocates Summit and Festival in November. In 2019, we held our first GTA Summit in China, and later this year, we're planning to host the summit in India. More details will be shared, and I hope that some of you will be able to join us. Again, thanks for joining today's event.
Thank you for that, Russ. And thank you to the Global Tech Advocates community for your support of this event. A huge thank you also to all of our panelists, to Kenneth from EDB, and to our wonderful moderators, Rachel Defoe and Valerie Lim. For us, this event is just the tip of the iceberg, the beginning of the conversation. All of our panelists are accessible and are eager to engage. Reach out to the TSA team at core@techsingaporeadvocates.com and we will connect you. It's what we're here to do. Finally, a huge thank you from all of us at TSA to Brandon and his team at Dynamic, as well as graphic designer extraordinaire Kenneth Tan. We can connect you to them too, by the way. Thanks, everyone. Good night.